Imagine a night so quiet that every sound seems amplified: the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the distant hum of a city settling into sleep. On this night, history's most significant decision is about to unfold, not in a grand hall, not on a battlefield, but in the stillness of a secluded garden. This is the Garden of Gethsemane, perched on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, a place where ancient olive trees twist skyward, their gnarled trunks bearing silent witness to countless seasons and stories. Gethsemane is more than a garden. Its very name means oil press. In it, olives were crushed here to produce oil. And in a striking parallel, on this night, Jesus kneels beneath the canopy of these trees, about to be pressed under the weight of humanity's sins. Every act of rebellion, every moment of injustice, every failure and every betrayal that has ever occurred in human history converges in this quiet moment. The crushing is not physical alone, it is spiritual, emotional, and cosmic. And yet, this is also a moment of immense love, a love so profound that it transforms suffering into purpose. As Jesus, the night air is cold, the moonlight gentle, and yet the tension is almost palpable. His closest companions, the disciples, are asleep, unaware of the gravity of the moment. Imagine the solitude, the weight of anticipation pressing down on him, and the choice he must make: to embrace the path of ultimate sacrifice or to turn away from it. The garden becomes a sacred stage, a place where humanity's fate intersects with divine purpose. In this stillness, we see Jesus' humanity on full display. His anguish is raw and honest, a reminder that even the Son of God felt fear, sorrow, and the pull of human desire. Yet, within this struggle lies extraordinary strength, the strength to surrender, to trust, and to embrace a purpose far greater than personal comfort or safety. Not my will, but yours be done, he prays, words that echo across time, inviting each of us to witness what true surrender looks like. This moment is not just a historical event. It is a living lesson. It challenges us to reflect on our own lives, on the burdens we carry, the fears that hold us back, and the moments when we must choose obedience over ease, love over fear, and purpose over comfort. Just as the olive press transforms crushed fruit into life-giving oil, the trials we face, when met with courage and faith, can become sources of growth, light, and transformation. So as we journey into this story, take a moment to prepare your heart. Picture the ancient olive trees, the quiet night, the heavy weight pressing upon Jesus, and the courage it took to say yes when every instinct screamed no. This is the story of Gethsemane, a story of love, surrender, and a triumph that begins in the quietest of places. If you find inspiration in this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next chapters of this incredible journey. Every share helps others discover the profound lessons hidden in these timeless stories. The night in Gethsemane was heavy with a tension that seemed almost tangible, as if the very air had grown thick with anticipation, holding its breath in silent witness to the moment unfolding beneath the twisted branches of ancient olive trees. Jesus knelt on the cool, uneven ground, his body pressed against the earth, and though the moonlight glimmered softly across the leaves, it could not illuminate the storm that raged within his soul. The disciples lay in slumber nearby, their unaware breaths punctuating the stillness of the garden, while Jesus bore a burden so immense that words could scarcely capture its weight. This was not simply the dread of imminent arrest, nor merely the physical suffering he knew awaited him. It was the crushing responsibility of carrying the accumulated sins of all humanity, the unrelenting pressure of a world's rebellion, hatred, and brokenness pressing down upon him in a way that no other human could comprehend. Every act of injustice, every moment of betrayal, every lapse in love and every misstep of human pride seemed to gather around him, forming a weight invisible yet utterly suffocating. A spiritual gravity that bore down on his shoulders and settled deep within his heart. As he bowed in prayer, the intensity of his anguish became so overwhelming that his body responded in ways rarely seen. A profound manifestation of extreme stress known to science as hematidrosis, where the sweat mingles with blood from ruptured capillaries. A sign of suffering that is at once physical, emotional, and spiritual. In this extraordinary moment, the garden itself seemed to echo the gravity of what was occurring. The shadows of the trees stretched long and distorted, the soft rustle of leaves whispering like the murmurs of creation itself, as if even nature held its breath in awe of the scene. Jesus was fully aware of what lay ahead: the betrayal by one who had shared his table, the denial by those closest to him, the public humiliation, the physical torment, and most agonizing of all, the looming separation from the Father, a spiritual estrangement that his perfect unity with God had never before known. And yet, despite the terror that pulsed through his mind and body, despite the raw ache in his heart and the heaviness in his chest that threatened to collapse him into despair, he did not waver from the path set before him. The cup he prayed about, the cup that symbolized the full consequence of human sin and divine justice, was not merely an abstract concept, but a reality so intense that every moment of reflection and fear collided with a sense of destiny. He knew that to drink it was to embrace a suffering unparalleled, to accept the weight of guilt, regret, and transgression from every human life, past, present, and future, and to endure not only the punishment humanity deserved, but also the profound isolation that comes from standing in the breach between sin and redemption. His thoughts may have wandered, fleetingly, to the life he had known among the Galilean hills, the laughter of friends, the comfort of familiar routines, and yet each thought was swallowed by the enormity of what was required. There was no escape, no easier, only the path of obedience. And in that obedience lay the greatest demonstration of love ever known. As the night deepened, the pressure seemed to intensify, the invisible weight tightening around him like the embrace of a storm. The olive trees, ancient witnesses to countless seasons, seemed to bend under the invisible burden, their gnarled branches a silent mirror of the strain in Jesus' soul. His prayers were a mix of raw human honesty and unwavering devotion, a plea for relief, a surrender to purpose, a recognition of the reality he faced and the necessity of his choice. "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me," he whispered into the still night, a confession of his humanity, of the fear that coursed through him in every heartbeat. "Yet not as I will, but as you will." In this utterance, the tension between flesh and spirit, fear and love, personal desire and divine mission, was laid bare in a single, profound act of surrender. Even in this solitary struggle, the moment was imbued with cosmic significance. What seemed a personal anguish was in truth the hinge upon which the fate of all creation turned. The spiritual forces of darkness, though unseen, were palpably present, seeking to sway, to distract, to overwhelm. Yet his resolve remained anchored in the certainty of God's purpose. Each moment of hesitation, each shiver of doubt, was met with a renewed commitment to endure, a steadfastness that would define the path of redemption. And through the agony, through the fear that might have broken any ordinary heart, a remarkable paradox emerged. In the very act of surrender, in the recognition of the insurmountable weight he bore, there was strength, a quiet power that transcended the immediate pain and pointed toward the hope and life that his obedience would ultimately secure. The physical manifestations of his struggle, the sweat mingled with blood, the trembling, the exhaustion were but outward signs of an inner conflict of unparalleled intensity. The garden became a theater of divine and human interplay, a sacred space where suffering, love, and ultimate purpose converged. Here, in the silence of Gethsemane, The story of humanity's redemption was taking form, not through grand displays of power or public acclaim, but through the intimate, heart-wrenching courage of one who chose love over fear, obedience over ease, and purpose over self-preservation. Every heartbeat, every whispered prayer, every drop of sweat born into the soil of the garden was an expression of a commitment so profound that it reshaped the destiny of every soul. And as the first hints of dawn would later approach, the night's darkness still pressing around him, the depth of his agony, the intensity of the struggle, and the unyielding choice to embrace it all revealed a truth that resonates far beyond the garden. That true courage is measured not in triumphs seen by the world, but in the quiet, unseen battles where fear is faced, burdens are carried, and love prevails in the most unimaginable circumstances. The stillness of Gethsemane held a tension that seemed to press against the very air, as though creation itself leaned in to witness the quiet battle raging within Jesus, kneeling among the ancient olive trees. He was a figure of both immense vulnerability and unimaginable purpose. Caught between the instinct to turn from pain and the resolve to embrace the mission laid before him. The night was thick with shadows that danced across the twisted trunks, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper of the weight he carried, a reminder of the suffering that awaited him not only in body but in spirit. His heart wrestled with the desire to escape, a desire as natural as the breath that filled his lungs, the human instinct to avoid torment, to seek comfort and safety, pulsed within him with every heartbeat. Yet alongside that pulse flowed the unshakable knowledge of what was required, the understanding that the path of obedience was the path of love, the bridge between humanity's brokenness and divine redemption. In the quiet of the garden, each prayer he whispered carried the tension of a soul stretched to its absolute limits. Words that trembled with fear yet resonated with trust. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Within this single, profound utterance lay the entirety of his struggle. The clash between human instinct and divine purpose. The delicate balance of vulnerability and strength. The raw honesty of a heart confronted with unimaginable suffering, and the conscious choice to surrender that suffering into the hands of a higher plan. He understood the magnitude of what he faced. The cup was no ordinary trial, no simple burden, but the concentrated weight of every sin ever committed, every injustice ever inflicted, every moment in which humanity had chosen rebellion over righteousness, all converging upon him in a moment of divine intersection with human frailty. The gravity of this responsibility pressed on him like a force tangible and relentless. And yet within the intensity of this pressure, there emerged a profound lesson in the nature of courage, of obedience, and of love that does not shrink from the impossible. As he struggled with his fear and his longing to avoid pain, there was also an awareness that his choice would ripple through eternity. Every hesitation, every tremor of doubt, was weighed against the infinite significance of the path before him. The cost of defiance versus the power of surrender. He did not close his eyes to the reality of suffering. He did not diminish the terror of the path that lay ahead. Instead, he faced it fully, the ache of impending betrayal, the knowledge of mockery, physical torment, and the spiritual separation from the Father that awaited him. Yet he chose to yield to the divine will, to accept the necessary suffering with a heart aligned not to personal desire, but to ultimate purpose. In this act, surrender became not weakness but strength, an expression of courage so profound that it redefined the very meaning of obedience. To yield voluntarily to what is difficult, to embrace a path of pain for the sake of others, is an act of power and love intertwined. And in this garden, every whisper of prayer, every trembling movement, embodied that truth. The physical world mirrored the spiritual battle. Sweat, mingled with blood from the intensity of his anguish, traced lines down his face. His hands pressed into the soil as if to anchor himself against the storm of what lay ahead. every shiver of his body a testament to the immense pressure of bearing humanity's weight. Yet in the midst of this physical manifestation of suffering, there was also clarity, an unshakable focus that pierced through the fear. The choice was no longer abstract. It was immediate and intimate, a decision that transcended time, a pivot upon which the fate of the world turned. In the tension between desire and duty, between instinct and divine mission, the essence of what it means to surrender, to trust completely, and to act from love rather than fear was laid bare. A lesson for all who would come after him about the power of yielding to purpose greater than oneself. As the night deepened, the weight of his anticipation and agony did not lessen, but his resolve strengthened, a quiet determination rooted not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of unwavering faith. Every heartbeat, every whispered plea, was a negotiation between flesh and spirit, between the human longing for self-preservation and the divine call to fulfill a plan that required absolute obedience. In the garden, the struggle was invisible to all but the trees and the stones. Yet it was cosmic in significance, a confrontation with the full measure of human brokenness and the power of divine love meeting it without compromise. His decision was deliberate, conscious, and irrevocable. He would not shrink. He would not turn away. He would embrace the suffering, accept the cup, and align his will with that of the Father, understanding that in this surrender, the path to redemption would be forged. In choosing obedience over avoidance, in saying not my will, but yours be done, Jesus transformed fear into purpose, anguish into triumph, and vulnerability into strength. The garden became more than a place of sorrow. It became a sanctuary of teaching, showing that the path of surrender, though wrought with pain and struggle, is also the path through which love achieves its greatest victory. This moment in Gethsemane reveals the profound truth that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly despite it, that obedience is not passive compliance but an active, deliberate embrace of purpose, and that the deepest love is often expressed in the willingness to endure what others cannot. In the quiet of that night, under the shadows of olive trees, a story of ultimate surrender unfolded, a story that carries within it the blueprint for facing life's gravest trials with trust, strength, and a heart open to the will greater than our own. The Garden of Gethsemane stands not only as the quiet setting for Jesus' most intimate struggle, but as a profound counterpoint to the story of humanity's first failure in Eden, a place where disobedience introduced sin, separation, and death into the world, where Adam and Eve had succumbed to temptation, allowing doubt and fear to outweigh trust. Gethsemane became the stage on which obedience would reclaim what had been lost. Under the ancient olive trees, whose gnarled branches had witnessed countless seasons and whose roots reached deep into the earth, Jesus faced the culmination of a divine plan that stretched across time, a plan designed to restore what rebellion had fractured. The night was thick with the gravity of what was to come, a quiet darkness broken only by the distant murmur of the sleeping city. And yet within this stillness, the tension of cosmic significance pressed upon him as he contemplated the path of suffering, the cup of humanity's sins he was about to take upon himself, and the spiritual burden that would separate him, however briefly, from the perfect unity he had always shared with the Father. Gethsemane, with its meaning as an oil press, became more than a metaphor. It became a living illustration of the crushing weight that sin carries and the transformative power of surrender. In Eden, humanity had chosen self-preservation and desire over trust and obedience, and the world had been forever altered. Now, in the quiet shadows of this sacred garden, the narrative was poised to reverse that curse, not through human effort but through the deliberate, conscious choice of one who was both fully divine and fully human. As Jesus, the weight of history pressed upon him the accumulated failures, betrayals, and rebellions of every person who had ever lived, as well as those yet to come. The agony that had already caused his sweat to mingle with blood was not merely physical. It was a confrontation with the spiritual consequences of every act of sin. A moment where the brokenness of humanity collided with the unrelenting love of God in a way that transcended comprehension. In this convergence, the garden became a theater of redemption, a place where the failure of Eden would be met with an act of obedience so profound that it would set the stage for the crucifixion and the resurrection that followed. The parallels are striking. Eden, with its promise and its peril, ended in separation. Yet Gethsemane begins a story of reconciliation. Where Adam's hesitation allowed fear to dictate action, Jesus' surrender embodied perfect trust, a trust so deep that it embraced not only the personal cost of suffering but the universal consequences of sin. The olive press, which had for generations crushed fruit to produce oil, mirrored the spiritual reality unfolding beneath its branches. Immense pressure applied not for destruction, but for transformation. A process through which pain becomes purpose, suffering becomes the medium of redemption, and obedience becomes the pathway to life restored. Every heartbeat, every whispered prayer of anguish, every drop of sweat and blood bore witness to this reversal, signaling that the broken trajectory set in motion at Eden could be, through divine obedience, redirected toward restoration and hope. In the shadowed garden, the choice was neither abstract nor distant. It was immediate and intensely personal, yet its implications spanned the entire scope of human history. The cup of suffering, which contained not only the physical torment of crucifixion, but the weight of spiritual separation, symbolized the consequence of every misstep humanity had ever taken. To drink it required more than courage, it demanded an embrace of the divine mission with a heart aligned perfectly to the Father's will. And yet, in the midst of overwhelming fear and sorrow, Jesus chose obedience. The words he whispered, "Not my will, but yours be done," resonated far beyond the night air, carrying with them the power to undo the fractures of Eden, to reverse the curse that had begun with a single act of doubt and defiance, and to initiate the chain of events that would lead to the ultimate triumph over sin and death. This moment in Gethsemane illuminates the intricate interplay between human failure and divine purpose. While Eden's story is one of capitulation to fear, the Garden of the Mount of Olives is a story of victory achieved through surrender. The same darkness that had once brought separation now frames a decision that restores connection. The same burden of sin that once ensnared humanity now finds a willing bearer who transforms it into a conduit of grace and reconciliation. The imagery is rich and layered. The pressed olives, the sweat like blood, the shadows stretching across the ground, all coalescing into a narrative that demonstrates how suffering, when met with obedience and love, becomes the instrument through which brokenness is healed. In the silence of the night, the human desire to evade pain clashed with divine purpose, and it was in that struggle that the reversal of Eden's failure was enacted. Quietly, resolutely, and irrevocably. As Jesus rose from prayer, his resolve unshaken despite the looming hours of betrayal and crucifixion, the garden itself seemed to hold a quiet witness to the triumph of obedience over fear. The story of Gethsemane becomes a narrative bridge, linking the despair of Eden with the hope of the resurrection, revealing that the consequences of human failure need not define the future. Through his surrender, Jesus demonstrated that even the most crushing weight of sin, when met with trust and alignment with God's will, can be transformed into a source of redemption, light, and restoration. The garden, the olive press, the agony, and the ultimate choice all converge into a lesson that extends across time. That obedience, love, and courage can reverse even the deepest failures, and that the path of surrender, though wrought with pain, is the path through which restoration flows, foreshadowing the victory of the cross and the life renewed through resurrection. The shadows of Gethsemane deepened as the distant sound of approaching footsteps cut through the night. breaking the sacred stillness that had held the garden in quiet tension. And with them came the flickering light of torches that cast long, distorted shapes across the gnarled trunks of ancient olive trees, painting the earth in moving streaks of gold and darkness, a visual prelude to the drama about to unfold. Among the figures emerging from the night was Judas Iscariot, one who had walked alongside Jesus, shared meals, witnessed miracles, and received teachings that had transformed him. Yet in that moment he carried within him the weight of betrayal, a choice fueled by fear, greed, or despair, the precise motivations known fully only to him and God, yet made manifest in the deliberate act that would mark the beginning of a chain of events altering the course of history. The air seemed to thicken as Judas stepped forward, his face illuminated by the wavering torchlight, and in a gesture that had once symbolized friendship and affection, he pressed his lips to Jesus in a kiss, a moment that simultaneously expressed intimacy and treachery, a symbol of humanity's capacity to confuse love with self-interest, to cloak betrayal in familiar comfort, and to twist what should have been devotion into an act that set in motion immense suffering. Jesus, fully aware of the impending arrest, did not flinch, did not lash out, and did not curse. Instead, he spoke a single word laden with depth and restraint, calling Judas friend, a term that pierced the night with both sorrow and grace, reflecting the paradoxical nature of his mission, to confront evil without yielding to it, to meet treachery with love rather than retaliation, to demonstrate through action that the power of mercy transcends the instinct to respond with fear or anger. The moment was electric with tension. The disciples, still groggy from their earlier exhaustion, watched as the culmination of their fears and confusions came to life. And Peter, moved by loyalty and raw emotion, drew his sword in a reflex of protective violence, striking the servant of the high priest and severing his ear, a gesture that mirrored the human instinct to fight when confronted with injustice. Yet even in this act, the lesson of restraint and compassion was immediately illustrated, for Jesus intervened not with condemnation, not with retribution, but with healing, restoring the ear as a visible manifestation of the ethos that guided his response: love over fear, grace over anger, and peace over chaos. The juxtaposition could not have been clearer. Peter, a man of impulse and courage, represented the human tendency to meet aggression with aggression, while Jesus embodied the divine principle that the most profound power is exercised through restraint, through compassion, and through choosing the path that leads not to immediate satisfaction, but to ultimate redemption. As the soldiers and temple guards moved closer, surrounding Jesus with ropes, lanterns, and the weight of authority, the disciples scattered, succumbing to fear and uncertainty, leaving him momentarily alone in the garden that had already borne witness to his agony. Yet in that solitude, the narrative of divine obedience and human response converged, showing that even in isolation, one can act with intentional love and restraint, that courage is not measured merely by defiance, but by the conscious choice to respond rightly in the face of provocation. The kiss of Judas, which should have been an emblem of loyalty, became instead a symbol of humanity's capacity for betrayal, a stark reminder that closeness does not guarantee fidelity, and that even those nearest can become instruments of suffering. Yet Jesus' response illuminated an alternative path, a model of unwavering commitment to love, forgiveness, and purpose that transcends circumstance, demonstrating that the measure of character is revealed not in how one is treated by others, but in how one chooses to respond. In the interplay of light and shadow, of whispered motions and the shuffle of armored feet, the garden became both a stage and a classroom, teaching lessons that extend far beyond the immediate drama, revealing the depth of human frailty alongside the boundless potential of mercy, and illustrating that obedience to divine principle often requires confronting the darkest impulses of both self and others with unwavering integrity. The violent impulse of Peter, though understandable, was met not with scorn but with instruction. The act of healing the wounded servant serving as a concrete testament to the principle that power, exercised with compassion, can transform even acts of hostility into opportunities for redemption. Each gesture, each word, each deliberate choice became a living parable. Betrayal may come from those closest. Aggression may erupt in moments of fear. Yet love, when chosen consciously, has the capacity to reframe suffering into purpose, to meet chaos with order, and to respond to hostility with grace that confounds expectation and elevates the human spirit toward higher ideals. As the guards bound him and led him away, the weight of impending crucifixion and the spiritual burden of humanity's sin pressed ever more heavily upon Jesus. Yet even in this unfolding drama of capture and isolation, the essence of his teaching was clear, encoded in the contrast between the reactions of those around him and his own deliberate choices. In a single sequence of events, a kiss, a drawn sword, a severed ear, a healed wound, he revealed the timeless truth that love is active, not passive, that grace is demonstrated in moments of confrontation, not merely in moments of calm, and that responding to fear, betrayal, and aggression with deliberate mercy is not weakness, but an expression of the highest strength. A strength that moves the narrative of humanity toward redemption and provides a model for how individuals may confront their own moments of trial with courage, compassion, and unwavering integrity. The night of Gethsemane, illuminated by torchlight and shadow, sound and silence, fear and obedience, became the crucible in which the principles of love over fear and mercy over anger were forged, leaving an indelible mark on history and providing a guidepost for all who seek to respond to betrayal and violence with a heart aligned to purpose greater than oneself, showing that even in the darkest of human encounters, the choice of grace remains a light that cannot be extinguished. As the night in Gethsemane gave way to the first hints of dawn, the garden remained cloaked in the soft shadows of the ancient olive trees, their twisted branches whispering in the morning breeze. And yet the stillness of that night carried a weight far greater than the quiet of the sleeping city could ever suggest. In that secluded place, hidden from the eyes of the world, Jesus had faced a trial unlike any other, a trial not of armies or earthly power, but of the human heart and divine purpose intertwined. And through it, he had demonstrated a truth that transcends time. That surrender, trust, and resilience are often the vessels through which life's greatest victories are achieved. The agony, the sweat mingled with blood, the wrestling of human desire against divine will, all culminated in a single act of obedience that would echo through history, a decision that transformed what could have been despair into hope, what could have been abandonment into redemption, and what could have been defeat into triumph. In reflecting on the events of Gethsemane, it becomes clear that the moments which appear quiet, even insignificant to the outside observer, often carry the greatest significance. The garden was empty of crowds, absent of accolades, yet it was precisely in that silence that the trajectory of humanity was altered. The struggle of Jesus was both intensely personal and profoundly universal. He faced the full weight of humanity's sins and yet not to cling to self-preservation, choosing instead to trust in the Father's plan, knowing that the path would be painful, uncertain, and fraught with suffering, but also knowing that through that obedience, life and hope would be restored. This quiet courage, often overlooked, reminds us that true purpose is rarely forged in the glare of recognition or applause. It is cultivated in the unseen hours, in the private moments when choices are made not for reward but for faithfulness, not for comfort but for the fulfillment of a higher calling. The story of Gethsemane also teaches the profound power of surrender. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness, as giving up or stepping back. Yet in the garden, it becomes clear that surrender is a deliberate, conscious act of strength, a choice to align with a purpose greater than oneself. Jesus' prayer, "Not my will, but yours be done," embodies this principle, illustrating that surrender does not mean a lack of agency, but a disciplined decision to embrace the path set before us, even when it challenges every instinct to avoid pain, fear, or uncertainty. In our own lives, we encounter moments that mirror this tension. Times when our desires conflict with what we know is right, when fear tempts us to retreat, and yet it is often in these moments that the seeds of growth, transformation, and resilience are sown. Just as the quiet night in Gethsemane became the birthplace of redemption, our unseen struggles, our private trials, and our moments of internal wrestling often shape the trajectory of our own character, faith, and destiny in ways that will only reveal their full impact over time. Resilience, too, emerges as a central lesson from Gethsemane. The capacity to endure, to remain steadfast in the face of immense pressure, and to act with courage despite overwhelming odds is exemplified in every heartbeat of that night. Jesus endured the weight of sin, the anticipation of betrayal, and the terror of separation from the Father. Yet he did not collapse under the strain. Instead, he demonstrated that resilience is rooted in trust, that endurance is empowered by a deeper connection to purpose, and that even the most unbearable burdens can be carried when one anchors oneself in something eternal. This resilience is not a passive endurance but an active, living force that shapes outcomes, transforms suffering into meaning, and teaches that hardship, when met with faith and intentionality, can become a crucible for growth and revelation. As we consider the implications of Gethsemane for our own lives, we are invited to see that God's purpose often unfolds in the quiet, unseen moments, when no one is watching, when the world seems indifferent, and when the weight of challenge presses heavily upon us. The story challenges us to embrace these moments with trust, to surrender our need for control, and to act with courage even when the path is uncertain, knowing that each choice, each act of obedience, and each moment of faith contributes to a greater narrative far beyond what we can immediately perceive. Just as the events in the garden laid the foundation for the resurrection, so too do our quiet acts of courage, love, and integrity prepare the way for transformation and hope in our own spheres of influence. Gethsemane also serves as a reminder that surrender and trust are intertwined with love and compassion. In the midst of his own suffering, Jesus extended mercy, demonstrated patience, and maintained focus on the ultimate purpose of his mission, revealing that endurance and obedience are most powerful when guided by love. This teaches us that resilience is not simply about personal fortitude, but about aligning our actions with principles that uplift, heal, and transform, even when it comes at a personal cost. The garden illustrates that true strength is inseparable from grace, and that every act of surrender to a higher purpose carries with it the power to effect change, not only within ourselves but in the lives of others as well. As we close this reflection, let us carry the story of Gethsemane with us as a guide for living with intentionality, faith, and courage. Let it remind us that our struggles are never wasted, that our moments of quiet surrender hold immense significance, and that by trusting in God's plan, we can navigate life's trials with hope, resilience, and grace. When you feel weighed down by challenges, remember that even in the darkest and most private moments, purpose is at work, shaping the trajectory of your life in ways that may only become clear over time. Let this story inspire you to face each day with trust, to embrace surrender as a source of strength, and to meet adversity with courage and compassion. Thank you so much for watching and journeying through this story with us. If this reflection on Gethsemane has touched your heart or encouraged you, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel for more inspirational Bible stories, and share this message with someone who might need to hear it today. Your support helps us continue to create content that uplifts, inspires, and brings the timeless lessons of Scripture into our everyday lives.